Hey guys, tonight we begin with something truly shameless. The lives of Wall Street bankers in the 1980s, a decade when greed wasn't just tolerated, it was practically a personality trait. These were men in suspenders who genuinely believed the universe was arranged for their convenience, snorting their breakfast, shouting into telephones the size of bricks, and treating other people's money like it was their personal arcade token supply. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and a sincere thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. It really does mean a lot, and the ideas you all send in are what keep this whole thing alive and growing. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. The channel is also now live on Spotify, so if you'd rather drift off there, the link is in the description. And if you'd like the ad-free extended version of tonight's episode, that's available through the membership as well. No pressure at all, only if it makes your night a little easier. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. But first, let's fill your head with some questions. Have you ever wondered what it felt like to earn more in a single bonus than your parents made in their entire lives, and still feel personally insulted by the amount? Did these people ever sleep? Or did they simply vibrate through the decade on ambition and expensive powder? What does a person actually wear when they want the whole world to know they could buy it and then fire it? Could you survive a job where screaming was a form of communication and lunch was a competitive sport? Would you last a single morning on a trading floor where your co-worker is weeping into a phone, your boss is throwing a stapler, and a man named Chip is trying to sell you Argentina? And most importantly, when the whole glittering machine finally came crashing down, would you have seen it coming, or would you have been too busy admiring your reflection in your own cufflinks? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1985. You have a splitting headache, a phone that weighs more than a newborn, and a deeply held belief that you are the most important person who has ever lived. Good luck. You wake in a Manhattan apartment that costs more per month than most people's homes cost outright, and yet somehow you feel entitled to complain about it. The alarm clock screams at 5 in the morning, which is cruel because you only stop talking about bond yields around 1. Your bedroom is a monument to a man who has money but absolutely no time to enjoy it. There is a gleaming stereo system you never listen to, a treadmill you use as a coat rack, and a view of the city you are too busy to look at. Your head is pounding, your mouth tastes like ambition and last night's regret, and your first conscious thought is not about your family or your health or the meaning of life. It is about a number. It is always about a number. You lie there for a moment in the grey, pre-dawn light, listening to the city already grinding awake below you, and you take a quick, honest inventory of your body. It is not good news. Your temples throb in time with your pulse. Your stomach is somewhere between empty and offended. There is a faint ringing in your ears that has been there since roughly 1983 and shows no sign of leaving. You slept, generously, 4 hours, and 2 of those were spent arguing with a client in a dream. This is normal. This is, in fact, something you are quietly proud of, because in your world, exhaustion is not a problem to be solved. It is a badge. It is proof that you are needed, wanted, essential, that the entire financial system would wobble on its axis if you dared to sleep like a coward until 7. You swing your legs out of the bed, which cost more than a small automobile, and which you chose entirely because a decorator told you it would impress people who will never see it. Your feet hit a floor so cold and so expensive, it feels like a moral statement. Somewhere in the apartment, a coffee machine, set on a timer by a housekeeper you rarely meet, is already gurgling to life because the one thing you have automated in your life is the delivery of stimulants. Everything else, the groceries, the plants, the mail, the concept of rest, is handled by other people or simply neglected until it dies. You stand, sway slightly, and steady yourself against the wall like a sailor on a rolling deck. And here is the strange part, the part that would baffle a normal person. You are not miserable, you're electric. Because as your brain slowly boots up and the fog begins to lift, it does not reach for peace, it reaches for the fight. Today, there are deals to close and rivals to crush, and a market that opens whether you're ready or not. Every cell in your body, hungover and sleep-starved and vaguely poisoned, is nonetheless straining toward that opening bell like a greyhound at the gate. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirrored closet door, and it is not a flattering sight. You look like a man who's been through something, but you square your aching shoulders anyway, because appearances are everything, and appearances start now. There is a whole ritual ahead designed to transform this crumpled, over-caffeinated wreck into a titan of finance. It involves marble, mousse, and a genuinely alarming quantity of cologne. So before you can rule the world, you first have to survive the bathroom. Let's talk about grooming, because in 1980s Wall Street looking successful was not optional, it was a weapon. You stumble into a marble bathroom that could comfortably host a small dinner party and begin the sacred morning transformation. There is mousse involved. There's a great deal of mousse. Your hair must be slicked back so aggressively that it looks less like a hairstyle and more like a legal threat. You splash on cologne with the enthusiasm of a man trying to mask a crime scene, because subtlety is for people who lose. By the time you look in the mirror and give yourself a small deranged nod of approval, you have applied more product than a modern spa uses in a week. The shower comes first, and it is scalding, because you have decided somewhere along the way that comfort is for the weak, and that pain is just efficiency you can feel. The water hammers down on your abused shoulders while you stand there planning your first 3 phone calls of the day. You do not relax in the shower. You do not think idle thoughts. You strategize, naked and steaming, like a general in a very small tiled war room. When you step out, you do not gently pat yourself dry. You attack yourself with a towel as though it has insulted your mother. Then comes the hair, and this is where the real artistry begins. Your hair is the crown, the helmet, the flag you fly over the fortress of your face. You work in the mousse, then the gel, then possibly more gel, sculpting everything backward and tight against your skull, until it gleams under the lights like polished stone. It must not move. It must survive wind, sweat, panic, and a 14-hour day without a single strand daring to rebel. When you're finished, your hair could deflect a thrown telephone, and given your line of work, that is not a hypothetical. Next, the face. You shave with a blade, of course, because disposable razors are for people who take the subway their whole lives. You lean in close to the mirror, cheeks pulled tight, and scrape away the evidence of the night before with grim precision. A nick, a bead of blood, you barely notice. Then the aftershave hits, and your entire face briefly regrets being born, and you inhale sharply and feel, for one bracing second, genuinely alive. This is the closest thing to meditation you'll get all day. Finally, the cologne. Oh, the cologne. You do not dab. You do not spritz. You apply it like a man salting a field so nothing can ever grow there again. The idea is that people should smell your ambition before they see it, that your scent should enter a room a full 3 seconds before you do, and start negotiating on your behalf. It is powerful. It is expensive. It is frankly a public health concern in a crowded elevator, but you will never know that because no one on earth is brave enough to tell you. You lean in one last time and study the result. The hollow eyes are still there, the exhaustion still lurks underneath, but layered over the top of it now is a gleaming, fragrant, terrifyingly confident mask of success. You nod at yourself. The reflection nods back, equally deluded. You are ready. Well, almost. Because a face this expensive demands a body wrapped in something even more expensive, and it is time to put on the armour. Now it's time to get dressed, and this is not a casual affair. This is armour. You reach for a suit that costs more than a used car, one of several identical suits, because a real man of the market does not have time to make decisions about clothing when there are hostile takeovers to plan. The braces, and you would never insult them by calling them suspenders, are a bold colour designed to be seen from across a room and possibly from space. The tie is silk, the collar is contrasting, and the whole outfit is engineered to broadcast one simple message to everyone you meet. I am extremely expensive, and you cannot afford my opinion of you. Let's begin with the suit itself, because everything else is built around it. It is tailored, of course. The idea of buying a suit off a rack, one that a stranger might also be wearing, fills you with a horror most people reserve for genuine tragedies. No, your suits are made for your body by a man who has measured every inch of you, and who you privately consider one of the most important people in your life. The shoulders are structured to make you look broader, more immovable, more like a wall that money bounces off. The pinstripes run vertical and confident, subtly informing everyone that you are at all times taller and more serious than they are. The shirt is crisp white or pale blue, and here is the detail that separates the men from the boys. The collar and cuffs are a contrasting colour, blindingly white against a coloured body, a small flourish that says you paid attention and you paid extra. The cuffs are French, fastened with cufflinks that cost more than a decent second-hand car, because the tiny glint of gold at your wrist when you gesture dismissively at a subordinate is worth every penny. Then the braces. You clip them on with a snap of satisfaction, and yes, they are load-bearing in the sense that they hold up your trousers, but their real job is decorative aggression. They are patterned, colourful, occasionally featuring tiny repeating symbols like dollar signs or little animals, and you wear your jacket open just enough to let them peek through, a flash of personality on a body otherwise dressed for war. A belt would be simpler. A belt would also be boring, and boring is the one thing you cannot afford to be. The tie goes on next, knotted with a fat, confident dimple, silk so bright it borders on hostile. The shoes are leather, polished to a mirror shined by someone else, laced tight, ready to march across marble lobbies and trading floors with the crisp authority of a man who has never once questioned whether he deserves to be there. You slide a heavy watch onto your wrist, one chosen specifically because other bankers will recognise it and civilians will not. A secret handshake you can wear. You stand before the full-length mirror and take yourself in, and there it is. The transformation is complete. The wreck who peeled himself off an overpriced mattress an hour ago is gone, replaced by a gleaming, armoured, faintly overpowering monument to 1980s excess. You look expensive. You look dangerous. You look, above all, like someone whose time is worth more than yours. You allow yourself one final satisfied breath. Then your stomach growls, reminding you that even titans must occasionally eat, and it is time for the first performance of the day, which happens to come with a menu. It's time for breakfast, and no, you will not be eating a quiet bowl of cereal at home like a normal human being. That would be a waste of a perfectly good opportunity to intimidate someone. Breakfast is a business meeting held at a restaurant where the tables are close together so everyone can overhear how important you are. You order coffee, black, and possibly eggs you will not touch, because eating is a sign of weakness, and also you are far too wired to have an appetite. Across the table, a colleague is talking about a deal, but you're only half listening, because the other half of your brain is calculating whether he is lying to you. He is. You both are. The restaurant is one of a small handful in the city where the powerful gather before dawn to do business over toast, and being seen here matters enormously. The tables are packed close, and this is not an accident. It means that at any moment you might be overheard by exactly the right person, or overhear something yourself worth a fortune. The whole room hums with low, urgent conversation, forks clinking, deals whispering, waiters gliding between chairs carrying pots of coffee, like priests carrying something holy. You feel, walking in, a pleasant little jolt of belonging. These are your people, over-caffeinated, underslept, and entirely convinced of their own importance. You shake hands with your breakfast companion, a firm, dry grip and a moment of aggressive eye contact, the standard opening ritual, a bit like two rams gently establishing which one gets the hill. You both sit. You both order coffee. You both order food you have no intention of finishing, because to actually enjoy a leisurely breakfast would suggest you have time on your hands, and having time on your hands is the most shameful condition a man in your position can admit to. The conversation begins as small talk, but small talk is never really small here. Every casual question is a probe. How is the family, he asks, which means, are you distracted? Busy quarter, you say, which means I am winning and you should be nervous. You mention a deal, vaguely, just enough to suggest you know something, not enough to actually reveal it. He does the same. The two of you dance around the real information like a couple of very expensive cats circling a single bowl of cream, each waiting for the other to lunge first. You sip your coffee, black and bitter, and let the caffeine layer itself over the residual chemistry already sloshing through your system. Your leg is bouncing under the table. Your eyes keep flicking to the door, to the other tables, cataloguing who is here, who they are sitting with, what that might mean. You catch the eye of a rival across the room, mid-handshake with someone important, and you feel a hot little spike of envy that you immediately convert into fuel. Everything, even breakfast, is a scoreboard. The eggs arrive and go cold. Neither of you cares. The meeting is not about nourishment. It never was. It is about positioning, about being seen, about extracting one useful crumb of information while giving away nothing in return. When the bill comes, you both reach for it in a brief theatrical wrestling match of generosity, and whoever loses gets to feel powerful for paying and put it on the company anyway. You stand, shake hands again, exchange a final round of meaningless warmth, and part ways already forgetting each other. Out on the sidewalk, the city is fully woken now, and the clock in your head is ticking louder. The market does not wait for men who linger over toast. It is time to make your way downtown, and how you travel there is its own small statement. Now you must travel to the great temple of money itself, and how you get there says everything about who you think you are. Maybe you take a town car, sinking into the leather while reading the financial pages and sighing loudly about interest rates. Maybe, if you're still clawing your way up, you take the subway, standing in your beautiful suit among the regular people you secretly believe you have already left behind. Either way, the journey downtown is less a commute and more a psychological warm-up, a chance to remind yourself that today, like every day, you intend to win. Whatever winning even means anymore. Let's say you have made it far enough to warrant the car, because that is the dream, and you have chased it ruthlessly. A black town car waits at the curb, engine idling, a driver who knows your name and your route and your moods. You climb into the back and sink into the leather, and for a moment the chaos of the street is sealed away behind tinted glass. This is the closest thing to peace you will experience today, and you spend it doing precisely no relaxing whatsoever. Instead, you snap open the financial pages, still smelling of ink, and begin devouring the numbers, muttering, underlining, occasionally shaking your head at some development as though the entire global economy has personally disappointed you. The car crawls downtown through traffic that does not care about your importance, and this is a source of genuine, simmering frustration. You have money, power, tailored shoulders, and a driver, and yet you are still stuck behind a delivery truck like a common mortal. You check your watch. You check it again. You consider briefly whether shouting would help, and conclude correctly that it would not, though it might make you feel better. If you're still on your way up, though, the reality is humbler and you hate it. You descend into the subway, gleaming and fragrant, and stand shoulder to shoulder with the very people you've quietly decided you are better than. The car is loud and rattling, and smells of things your cologne is losing a war against. You grip a pole with one hand and clutch your leather briefcase with the other, holding it against your chest like a shield, terrified of a scuff, and you stare into the middle distance, rehearsing the version of yourself you're about to become the moment you reach the office. Around you, ordinary New Yorkers read their papers, doze, argue, live their lives, entirely unaware that they're sharing a train with a self-declared master of the universe. You find this both insulting and motivating. One day you promise yourself, gripping the pole a little tighter, one day it is the car every single morning, no exceptions, and you will never again have to smell another human being before 9 o'clock. The train lurches, the crowd sways, and you sway with it, and somewhere in the swaying your mind is already on the floor, already dialing, already shouting numbers into a phone. This ride, whether padded with leather or crammed standing among strangers, is the last quiet moment before the storm. You use it to wind yourself tighter, not looser, to sharpen the blade rather than sheathe it. Then the car glides to a stop, or the train doors hiss open, and you step out into the financial district, where the buildings rise around you like the walls of a canyon carved entirely out of money. Your building is ahead of you now, tall and cold and glittering, and it is time to walk inside and let it swallow you whole. You arrive at a towering building of glass and stone, the kind designed to make ordinary visitors feel small and important people feel enormous. The lobby is cold, echoing, and stuffed by security guards who have learned to nod at you without making it weird. You ride the elevator up alongside other men in nearly identical suits, all of you pretending not to size each other up, all of you absolutely sizing each other up. The doors open, and a wall of noise hits you like a physical object. Somewhere in that chaos is your desk, your phone, and your entire reason for existing. Welcome to the floor. The lobby alone is designed to do a job, and the job is intimidation. The ceilings soar impossibly high, the floors are polished stone that clicks under your leather soles, and everything is scaled just slightly too large for a human being, so that visitors arrive already feeling like children who've wandered somewhere they should not be. You, however, stride through it like you own it, because in your mind you nearly do. You give the security guard the smallest possible nod, the nod of a man too busy for full acknowledgement, but generous enough to offer a fraction of one, and he nods back, having long ago learned exactly how much recognition men like you require. The elevator is its own theatre. You step in alongside a cluster of other suited men, and the doors close on a small sealed box of pure, silent competition. Nobody speaks. Everybody evaluates. You clock the quality of the fabric to your left, the shine of the shoes to your right, the watch peeking from a cuff across the car. You perform a lightning-fast internal ranking of every man present, place yourself confidently near the top, and stare at the ascending floor numbers with the serene expression of someone who has definitely not just done that. They are all doing exactly the same thing. The elevator hums upward, heavy with cologne and unspoken hierarchy. You feel your pulse quicken as the numbers climb, not from the height, but from anticipation, the way an athlete feels walking toward the field. Men peel off at various floors, and each departure subtly rearranges the ranking in your head. By the time you reach your own floor, you're practically vibrating, wound tight, ready. The little chime sounds, the doors slide open, and the noise arrives all at once, like opening a door onto a hurricane. The polite hush of the elevator is instantly obliterated by a roaring wall of sound, hundreds of voices shouting over one another, phones ringing without pause, the electric crackle of pure human urgency filling every cubic foot of air. It should be unpleasant. To a normal person, it would be genuinely alarming, the sort of environment you flee rather than enter willingly for money. But to you, it is oxygen. Your shoulders drop, your jaw sets, something behind your eyes switches on. This is where you're supposed to be. This is the only place that makes sense. You step out of the elevator and into the din, weaving between desks and running junior staff and men gesturing wildly with phones pressed to their ears, and you feel the last of the morning's fragility burn away completely. There is no room here for the hollow-eyed wreck from the expensive mattress. There is only the machine, and you are one of its most enthusiastic moving parts. You reach the edge of the great open floor and stop for just a second to take it in, this churning sea of ambition and noise, and you allow yourself one small breath before you dive in. Because if the lobby was designed to intimidate, the floor itself is something else entirely, a spectacle so loud and so relentless, it deserves a proper look before you throw yourself into it. Let's talk about the trading floor, because nothing in modern life quite prepares you for it. Imagine a room the size of an aircraft hangar, packed with hundreds of over-caffeinated men screaming at once. Phones ring constantly, papers fly, someone is standing on a chair, someone else is throwing something. The noise is not a distraction from the work, the noise is the work. Fortunes are made and lost in seconds here, based on shouted numbers and gut instinct and a shared refusal to ever appear uncertain. It is loud, it is brutal, and it is somehow considered a respectable profession. You take a deep breath, grab a phone, and join the roar. The floor stretches out before you in a sea of desks pushed together, each one buried under a landslide of paper, phones, coffee cups, and glowing terminals. There is no privacy here, no walls, no doors, no soft place to hide, just row upon row of men shouting into telephones and at each other and occasionally at the ceiling. The air is thick and warm, heated by hundreds of bodies and hundreds of machines and the sheer friction of collective panic. It smells of coffee, of cologne losing badly to sweat, and of cigarettes because yes, people smoke at their desks, ash tumbling onto documents worth millions. The volume is difficult to describe to someone who has not stood inside it. It is not a hum, it is a physical pressure, a permanent avalanche of sound that you learn somehow to hear through. Within it, a strange skill develops. You can be screaming into a phone at a client in one ear while catching, through the wall of chaos, the single crucial number someone shouted from 3 desks away. Your brain filters the roar like a radio tuning to one frequency out of 1,000. It is exhausting. It is also, in its own deranged way, thrilling. Movement is constant. Junior staff sprint between desks, clutching slips of paper as though the fate of nations depends on their speed, which, in the local mythology, it sort of does. Someone leaps up and stands on his chair to be heard over the din, waving a phone above his head. Somewhere a man slams down a receiver so hard the whole desk jumps, then immediately picks it up again to make another call because there is never, ever, a moment to simply sit and feel something. The market moves whether you are ready or not, and it does not wait for you to have a reaction. You slide into your seat and it embraces you like a war has been waiting for your return. You grab a phone in one hand before you have even fully sat down. Your eyes flick across your terminal, drinking in the green numbers, and your other hand is already reaching for a second line. In the space of about 4 seconds, you have gone from a man to a machine, one small, furious node in a network of furious nodes, all buying and selling and shouting and gambling with money so vast it has stopped feeling like money and started feeling like points in a game. And that is really the secret of the place. The thing outsiders never quite grasp. The numbers are so enormous, the sums flying back and forth so detached from anything you could hold in your hand, that they lose all human weight. You're not thinking about pensions or savings, or the people at the other end of these trades. You're thinking about winning the next 30 seconds, and then the 30 after that, and the roar keeps you from thinking about anything else, which is precisely the point. You settle the receiver against your shoulder, take one last breath of the hot electric air, and open your mouth to shout your first number of the day. Which brings us naturally to the single most important object in your entire life, the one pressed against your ear right now, your beloved and deeply abused telephone. Your telephone is your sword, your shield, and your best friend, and you will spend the entire day yelling into it. This is the era before the internet did the work for you, so business happens through sheer vocal force. You cradle the receiver against your shoulder, dial with one hand, and gesture wildly with the other, as though the person on the line can see how passionate you are. You are calling clients, you are calling other traders, you are calling people who did not ask to be called. The goal is to talk faster than the other person can think, close the deal before they can reconsider, and hang up before they realize what just happened. Understand that in this world, information does not float invisibly through the air waiting to be tapped. There are no instant messages, no emails pinging silently across the globe. There is the phone, and the phone is everything. Every scrap of news, every rumour, every price, every deal reaches you through a wire pressed against the side of your head, delivered by a human voice, usually a shouting one. If you're not on the phone, you're nobody. A quiet phone on your desk is not restful. It is terrifying. It means the world is happening somewhere else, without you. So you keep it against your ear for hours at a stretch, until it leaves a red mark and your neck develops a permanent tilt. The professional posture of a man who has cradled a receiver on his shoulder so long his spine has simply given up and agreed to it. You dial with one hand, a blur of fingers on the buttons, while the other hand slashes through the air, jabbing and chopping and pointing at nothing, because passion must be expressed physically, even though the person you are shouting at is a mile away and cannot see a single gesture. It does not matter. The gestures are for you. The actual conversations are a strange art form. You do not speak to be understood so much as to overwhelm. The idea is to move faster than the other person's caution, to bury their hesitation under an avalanche of confidence and numbers and urgency, until they agree just to make the noise stop. You praise, you pressure, you flatter, you threaten, sometimes within a single sentence. You promise things are moving fast, that this window is closing, that everyone else is already in, and only a fool would sit this one out. Whether any of that is true is a philosophical question you do not have time to entertain, and when a call is going badly, when the person on the other end is being cautious, or clever, or worst of all, silent, you feel a genuine physical distress, a hot itch of frustration. Some of your colleagues handle this by slamming the phone down and immediately picking it back up to dial someone more agreeable. The equipment takes a beating. Receivers are cracked, cords are yanked from walls, entire phones occasionally take flight across the floor in moments of pure operatic rage, only to be replaced within the hour because a trader without a phone is a soldier without a weapon and cannot be allowed to stand around unarmed. By the middle of the day, your throat is raw and your ear is numb, and you have spoken to more people than most human beings meet in a month, and remembered almost none of them. They were not people, really. They were voices, opportunities, obstacles, targets. The phone flattens everyone into pure transaction, and you would not have it any other way. You hang up, flexing your aching hand, and turn to shout something at the colleague beside you, and here you notice something odd. What comes out of your mouth is barely recognizable as English, because the men on this floor do not simply talk. They speak a language all their own. Every tribe has its language, and the 1980s banker speaks a dialect so dense it might as well be a secret code. You do not buy things. You take a position. You do not lose money. You experience downside. Everything is leveraged. Everything is a play, and everyone is either long or short or getting crushed. You sprinkle in words like arbitrage and liquidity with the casual confidence of a man who is roughly 70% sure what they mean. The jargon serves two purposes. It makes complicated gambling sound sophisticated, and it keeps outsiders confused enough to hand you their money. Both are essential. Listen to yourself for a moment. Really listen. And it becomes almost funny. You never say you think a stock will go up. You say you are long. You never say you are betting it will fall. You say you are short. You do not have opinions. You have exposure. You do not make mistakes. You take a hit. There is a word or a phrase to armor plate every single thing that happens, to translate the raw and often humiliating reality of gambling, with enormous sums into something that sounds measured, technical, and above all professional. Some of the language is genuinely useful, a precise shorthand between people who need to communicate fast in a roaring room. When every second counts, a single crisp word that means an entire complicated idea is worth its weight in gold. But a great deal of it, if you are honest, and you rarely are, exists purely to sound impressive. Long words for simple ideas, Latin-sounding terms for basic bets, an entire vocabulary designed to make a stranger feel that something mysterious and brilliant is happening here, something far beyond their understanding. So they had best just trust you and stay quiet. This is the second and most important function of the jargon, and you understand it instinctively even if you would never admit it out loud. Confusion is profitable. When a client cannot follow what you're saying, they cannot easily tell whether you're a genius or simply making it up as you go. The fog of specialized language is not a side effect. It is a service you provide to yourself. It keeps the mystique intact, keeps the fees flowing, keeps everyone politely nodding along rather than asking the one dangerous question, which is, what exactly are you doing with my money? And you fling these words around with total confidence, whether or not you fully understand them, because hesitation is death. A man who pauses to admit he is unsure of a term has already lost the room, so you speak fluently and fast, dropping arbitrage here and liquidity there, and if a flicker of uncertainty passes behind your eyes, you simply talk louder and faster until it goes away. Everyone around you is doing exactly the same thing. The whole floor is a chorus of men speaking a language they only partly understand, to each other at volume, and somehow it all works. Or at least it works until it very dramatically does not. There is a strange comfort in it too. The shared tongue makes you a member of something, a tribe with its own secret words, its own rituals of speech. When you meet another man who speaks it, there is an instant recognition, a lowering of the guard, a sense of us against the confused and moneyed them. Outsiders hear gibberish. You hear home. So you shout your jargon into the roar, fluent and confident and only occasionally lying, and the sounds blend into the great churning noise of the floor. But even in a place this chaotic, there is order, a strict and merciless order, and every single morning it is laid out in a ritual that puts everyone firmly in their place. Before the real bloodshed begins, there is the morning meeting, a daily ritual where the hierarchy is made brutally clear. You file into a room and arrange yourselves according to an invisible but ironclad social order. The senior people speak, the junior people nod. The truly junior people try to become invisible while frantically taking notes. Someone delivers a pep talk that is equal parts motivation and threat, reminding everyone that the market does not care about your feelings and neither does management. You leave the meeting fired up, mildly terrified, and absolutely certain that today you must produce or perish. The meeting happens early, before the opening bell, when the floor is still warming up and the coffee has not yet fully taken hold. You gather in a large room or crowd around a central point, and though no one has assigned seats, everyone knows precisely where they belong. The senior men take the prime positions naturally, without thought, the way water finds the bottom of a bowl. The mid-ranking hover in the middle, and the junior staff press themselves toward the back and the edges, hoping to observe everything and be noticed by no one, which is the safest condition for a young person in this environment. Then the talking begins, and it flows strictly downhill. A senior figure holds the floor, delivering the state of the world as they see it, which stocks look strong, which look weak, where the opportunities are, where the dangers lie. People contribute in careful order of rank. When an important person speaks, the room listens with theatrical attentiveness. When a junior person dares to offer a thought, the temperature shifts, and they had better be right, brief, and useful, or the silence that follows will teach them a lesson they will carry for years. The tone is a peculiar blend that outsiders would find bewildering. Half of it is pure motivation, a rousing call to go out there and dominate, to be aggressive, to seize the day and everything in it. The other half is naked threat, delivered with a smile that does not reach the eyes. You're reminded in various creative ways that the numbers are watched, that the weak are noticed, that everyone in this room is replaceable, and the replacements are hungry and cheaper. The message underneath every word is simple: perform or be gone. There is no third option, no gentle middle, no coasting. You stand there absorbing it, and something strange happens in your chest. You're frightened, genuinely a cold little knot of fear that today you might not measure up. But that fear does not weaken you. It sharpens you into a blade. The whole ritual is engineered to send you out onto the floor slightly desperate, wound tight with the need to prove yourself all over again, as though yesterday's wins have already evaporated and mean nothing, which, in the merciless arithmetic of this place, they do. You're only ever as good as today. The hierarchy on display is not cruelty for its own sake, though it certainly feels that way from the back of the room. It is the entire operating system. Everyone knows their rank. Everyone can see the rungs above them, and everyone is taught to climb by clawing, producing, and outperforming the person beside them. The pecking order is not a bug. It is the engine, and this meeting is where it gets refueled every single morning. The meeting breaks. The room empties in a surge of nervous energy, men peeling off toward their desks with jaws set and hearts pounding, ready to go make money or die trying. And as you move with them, you feel the pull of the one figure who loomed over the whole room, the person whose approval you crave and whose temper you fear in equal measure. Because standing at the very top of this pyramid is your managing director, and no account of your day would be complete without a proper look at your terrifying godlike boss. Let's talk about the boss, because every floor has one, a managing director who rules through a combination of charisma, fear, and an apparently bottomless expense account. This is a person who can end your career with a raised eyebrow and reward you with a fortune on a whim. They have a corner office, a secretary who guards them like a dragon guards gold, and a temper that arrives without warning like weather. You want their approval more than you have ever wanted anything, which is embarrassing, because deep down you know their approval is worth exactly as much as your last good trade, and not 1 penny more. The managing director occupies a corner office, and the corner office is not merely a room. It is a throne room, positioned so that the great man can survey the floor through a glass wall like a king watching his fields. To be summoned into that office is to feel your stomach drop the way it did as a child walking toward the principal. To be praised inside it is a high that lasts for days. To be scolded inside it is a wound you will replay for weeks. The whole geography of the floor is arranged around that single glass box, and everyone, whether they admit it or not, spent a portion of every hour wondering what the person inside it thinks of them. Getting past the secretary is its own trial. She has worked for the great man for years. She knows precisely who matters and who does not, and she wields her small kingdom of the calendar with absolute authority. A warm greeting from her can lift your whole morning. A cool one can ruin it. You're unfailingly, almost pathetically polite to her, because you understand on some animal level that she controls access to the sun. The managing director's moods are the weather of your entire world, and like the weather they cannot be argued with, only survived. On a good day he is expansive, generous, funny, dropping a compliment that makes your chest swell or authorizing an extravagance without blinking. On a bad day he is a storm front, and the whole floor lowers its voice and hunches its shoulders and tries to avoid the glass wall entirely. A thrown object is not unheard of. A public dressing down delivered at full volume in front of everyone is a recognized management technique, and being on the receiving end of one is a humiliation you would pay almost anything to avoid. And here is the truly absurd part, the part you would never say out loud. You crave this man's approval with an intensity that would embarrass a teenager. A single nod from him, a muttered good work as he passes your desk, and you glow like a lamp for the rest of the day. You will work yourself sick for it. You will sacrifice sleep, health, relationships, entire chunks of your one short life, chasing the fleeting warmth of a busy man's passing approval. It is not rational. It is barely dignified, but it is the fuel the whole machine runs on. Because you know, underneath it all, exactly how conditional that approval is. He does not love you. He loves what you produce. The warmth is real only as long as the numbers are good, and the moment they falter, the corner office grows very cold indeed. You're not a person to him. You are a line on a report, and the report is updated daily. You leave his glass box carrying whatever mood he handed you, and you carry it back to your desk. And to keep the numbers good, to keep the great man pleased, some of your colleagues reach for a little chemical assistance, which brings us to the powder that quietly ran the whole decade. We should address the elephant in the room, or rather the small white lines on the desk. The 1980s on Wall Street ran, in large part, on cocaine, a substance that convinced an entire generation of financiers they were invincible geniuses when they were mostly just awake and talking very fast. It fit the culture perfectly. It promised endless energy, unshakable confidence, and no consequences, which is also, coincidentally, the exact pitch these men used to sell their financial products. The come down, both for the individual and eventually for the whole decade, would be spectacular. But nobody was thinking about that yet. Nobody had time. You have to understand why it took hold so completely, because it was not an accident. The job demanded the impossible. It asked men to work 20-hour days, to stay sharp through exhaustion, to feel bulletproof while gambling with sums that would keep any sane person awake at night. And here was a substance that seemed, at first, to deliver exactly that. It papered over the tiredness. It silenced the doubt. It let a hollow, sleep-starved wreck feel for an hour or two, like the smartest and most powerful man alive. In a culture that worshipped that exact feeling, it spread like fire through dry grass. The tragedy, and it was a tragedy dressed up as a party, is that the feeling was a lie. The confidence was chemical, not real. The energy was borrowed at a punishing rate of interest. Men made worse decisions while feeling more certain about them, which is roughly the most dangerous combination a person handling other people's money can possibly have. The very quality the drug seemed to grant, unshakable belief in oneself, was precisely the quality this environment already had far too much of. And the cost arrived, as it always does, quietly at first and then all at once. It hollowed people out. It wrecked marriages, health, judgment, and lives. Behind the gleaming suits and the roaring floor and the bottomless bravado, there were men coming apart, running on empty, chasing a feeling that got harder and harder to reach and cost more and more to find. Nobody discussed this. Discussing it would have meant admitting weakness, and weakness was the one unforgivable sin. So the toll was hidden, and the party roared on, and the bill kept quietly growing in a back room nobody wanted to enter. There is a grim symmetry to it that is hard to miss from a distance. The whole decade was, in a sense, high. Everyone was borrowing against the future. Everyone was convinced the good times would never end. Everyone was mistaking a temporary chemical rush, financial or otherwise, for permanent brilliance. The stuff on the desk was just the personal version of the thing happening to the entire market. Both promised endless upside. Both were running on borrowed energy. Both were heading for the same hard landing, and both were absolutely certain it would never come. You watch it happen around you, and maybe you are pulled into it yourself, because in an environment like this, saying no is its own kind of exhausting. And the strangest thing is how normal it all feels while you're inside it, how ordinary and even sensible, the way anything feels ordinary when everyone around you is doing it, and nobody is willing to be the first to say it might be a problem. But the market does not care how awake you feel. It cares only about the numbers on the screen, and so you turn, wired and hollow, back to the one machine that never lies to you, the glowing green terminal that is your only true window on the truth. Let's talk about your technology, which felt impossibly futuristic at the time, and looks, from here, absolutely adorable. Your window into the entire financial universe is a chunky machine called a quotron, a glowing screen of green numbers that you stare at with the intensity of a mystic reading tea leaves. There are no sleek laptops, no smartphones, no apps. There is a beige terminal, a tangle of cables, and a printer somewhere spitting out a ribbon of paper. When the numbers move, you move. When the screen freezes, grown men panic. Your entire empire runs on technology that a modern calculator would find quaint. The machine sits on your desk like a small humming altar, its screen a deep black filled with rows of glowing green figures, prices flickering and updating in a language only the initiated can read at a glance. To you, this jumble of symbols is as clear as a sentence. a civilian looking over your shoulder would see meaningless static. You see the entire mood of the world, the fear and greed of millions, distilled into little green digits that twitch and change and occasionally on a dramatic day seem to scream. You stare at it for hours with an intensity that borders on religious devotion. You do not glance at the screen. You commune with it. Your eyes flick across the numbers, catching a movement here, a shift there, your brain running constant calculations while the rest of you sits perfectly still. To an outsider, you would look like a man hypnotized, slumped and staring. But inside your skull a storm of arithmetic is raging. When the numbers move the right way, a jolt of pure joy shoots through you. When they move the wrong way, your stomach lurches as though you have missed a step in the dark. It is worth pausing on how primitive this all was, though of course it felt like living in the future at the time. There is no mouse to click, no window to open, no elegant interface designed by anyone who cared about your comfort. You type clunky codes on a heavy keyboard to summon the information you want, memorizing sequences of letters and numbers the way a pianist memorizes scales. The machine is slow by any standard you would tolerate today. It runs hot. It occasionally catastrophically freezes, and when it freezes you witness something remarkable, which is a grown, powerful, extremely well-paid man reduced instantly to a state of pure childlike panic. The green numbers stop moving. The window to the world slams shut, and a trader cut off from his prices is a pilot in a cloud with no instruments, blind and terrified and utterly useless. Voices rise. The machine gets smacked, as though a firm slap has ever fixed a piece of electronics in the history of the world. Someone bellows for technical help. For a few unbearable seconds, an entire desk full of masters of the universe are just anxious men staring at a dead screen, praying to a beige box. Then the numbers flicker back to life, and the crisis passes, and everyone pretends they were not just moments from a nervous breakdown over a frozen monitor. You exhale, roll your aching shoulders, and dive back into the green glow, your lifeline restored. But even a machine this sacred cannot feed you, and by now your borrowed energy is flagging and your stomach is staging a rebellion. So you tear your eyes from the terminal, because it is time for the one ritual of the day devoted entirely to conspicuous, competitive, gloriously wasteful consumption. It's lunchtime, which on Wall Street does not mean a sandwich at your desk. It means a 2-hour campaign of conspicuous consumption at a restaurant so expensive the menu does not list prices, because if you have to ask, you should not be sitting there. You order the steak, you order the wine, then more wine. You put the entire spectacular bill on the company expense account without a flicker of guilt. Because the expense account is not really money. It is a magical realm where consequences do not apply. Somewhere out there a client is being wooed, or a rival is being outspent. Mostly you're just eating like the last emperor of Rome. The restaurant is dim and hushed and clad in dark wood and white linen. The kind of place where the waiters move like ghosts and their prices are a state secret shared only with the confident. You're given a good table because you are known here, and being given a good table in front of other people is a pleasure so pure it nearly justifies the entire career. You settle in, unfold your napkin with a flourish, and prepare to spend an amount of money on a single meal that would feed an ordinary family for a month. You order the steak, of course, the largest and best cut available, because lunch is not about hunger, it is about appetite as performance. You order wine, something expensive enough to impress your guest and old enough to have opinions, and when the bottle is empty you order another without a second thought. The food is genuinely superb. You barely taste it. You're too busy talking, watching, positioning, half your mind on the conversation, and half on who just walked in and who they sat down with, and what that might mean for the delicate ecosystem of power you swim through every day. The purpose of all this, officially, is business. There may be a client at the table who must be flattered and softened and made to feel important, wrapped in enough luxury that handing you their money starts to feel like a privilege. Or there may be a rival you're quietly competing with, in which case the lunch becomes an arms race, each of you ordering more extravagantly than the other, spending your firm's money like rival monarchs, trying to out-feast one another into submission. The steak is a weapon, the wine is ammunition. And then there is the expense account, that glorious institution, that magical realm where the normal rules of money are gently suspended. You do not pay for this. The firm pays for this, which means, in the comforting fiction you have constructed, that nobody really pays for this at all. The bill arrives, enormous and unashamed, and you sign it with a lazy flick of the wrist and feel absolutely nothing. No guilt, no wince, no sense that this is real. Money spent on the expense account does not feel like money. It feels like weather, like something that simply happens, and the total detachment from cost is, honestly, one of the great perks of the whole absurd life. By the time you rise from the table, pleasantly wined and heavily fed, 2 hours have vanished and a small fortune has been quietly incinerated in the name of relationships. You feel expansive, powerful, well upholstered. You stroll back toward the office in no particular hurry, because a man who rushes back from lunch looks anxious, and you're far too important to look anxious. Yet underneath the fine wine and the finer steak, one cold thought is always ticking away. The thought that governs everything, the single number that all of this feasting and shouting and gambling is ultimately in service of. So let's finally talk about the thing that owns your soul. Let's talk about the bonus, because everything, absolutely everything, comes down to this. Your salary is almost an afterthought. The real prize arrives once a year in the form of a bonus, a single figure that you will treat as a complete and final verdict on your worth as a human being. You will obsess over it for months. You will compare it, secretly and desperately, to what you believe your colleagues received. A bonus that would change most families' lives forever can send you into a spiral of rage and despair if the man 2 desks over got slightly more. This is not about survival. It stopped being about survival a long time ago. This is about the scoreboard. Understand first how the money is actually structured, because it explains everything about how you behave. Your salary, the steady, predictable part, is almost beneath your notice, a modest trickle you barely register. The real money, the life-changing money, comes once a year in a single lump, and its size depends entirely on how you performed and how the firm did, and crucially, on the whims of the powerful men who decide these things behind closed doors. This means that for 11 months of the year, you are in effect auditioning, every trade and every deal quietly logged in an invisible ledger that will one day be converted into a single, all-important figure. And when that figure finally arrives, you receive it not as a payment but as a judgment. It is your grade. It is the firm telling you, in the only language you truly respect, exactly what it thinks you are worth. A big number is not just money, it is validation, love, proof, vindication. A disappointing number is not just less money, it is a slap, an insult, a statement that you are less than you believed yourself to be. Men have wept over bonus numbers that most of humanity would consider a lottery win. Men have quit in fury over sums that could buy a house outright. Because here is the poison at the centre of it, the thing that turns extraordinary fortune into genuine misery. It is never about the absolute amount. It is always, always about the comparison. You do not ask whether your bonus is enormous, whether it is more than your parents earned in their entire working lives, whether it is more than any reasonable person could spend. You ask only one question. Did the man 2 desks over get more? And if he did, even slightly, then your enormous, life-altering, absurdly generous bonus curdles instantly into an insult, and you sit there stewing in rage over a fortune poisoned by a comparison you were never even supposed to know about. This is the engine that drives the whole machine, and it's a cruel and brilliant piece of design. By tying your entire sense of self-worth to a single number, and then setting that number in silent competition against everyone around you, the firm ensures you will never, ever be satisfied. There is no amount that would be enough, because enough is not a number, it is a feeling, and the comparison guarantees you will never feel it. You will chase the next bonus, and the next, forever, always convinced that just a little more would finally settle the ache. It never does. You catch yourself doing the math even now, mid-year, trying to guess the number, trying to read the mood of the powerful, and you feel the familiar hunger tighten in your gut. It is a hunger no meal can touch, and to feed it, to justify the number you dream of, you need deals, big ones, spectacular ones. Which is why the whole industry fell so completely in love with a dazzling new invention that seemed, for a few glorious years, to conjure enormous money out of thin air. Now we come to the great financial invention of the age, the junk bond, which is exactly what it sounds like dressed up in a very nice suit. The idea, championed most famously out west by a financier who briefly seemed to have rewritten the rules of money itself, was simple and seductive. You could raise enormous piles of cash by selling risky, high-interest debt, and use that cash to do things that were previously unthinkable. It made the impossible suddenly possible, and it made a great many people obscenely rich. It also planted a time bomb under the whole system, ticking quietly beneath the champagne. But that is a worry for future you. Let's break down the magic trick, because underneath the intimidating name it is really quite simple. A bond is just a loan. When a company wants money, it can borrow by selling bonds, promising to pay the money back later with interest. Traditionally, only big, safe, boring companies could do this easily, because lenders wanted to be sure they would be paid back. Riskier companies were largely locked out, considered too dangerous to lend to. The bonds they might issue were sneeringly called junk, a name that stuck. Then along came the insight that lit the fuse. Yes, these riskier bonds were more likely to fail, but if you paid a high enough interest rate to compensate, and if you spread your bets across many of them, the numbers could work out beautifully. Suddenly, junk was not garbage, it was opportunity. All that risky debt nobody wanted to touch became a vast new ocean of money, and the man who understood this best became for a time one of the most powerful figures in all of finance, working not from the canyons of downtown but from an office out west, conducting the whole symphony from a distance. What made it so intoxicating was what the money could do. With access to these enormous new pools of cash, small players could suddenly act like giants. A modestly sized company or an ambitious individual could raise sums previously reserved for the largest institutions on earth. The old hierarchy, where only the established and the enormous had access to serious money, was blown apart. Anybody with a bold enough plan and a persuasive enough pitch could now borrow a fortune and go hunting. It felt like democracy. It felt like genius. It felt to the people riding the wave like they had discovered a genuine new law of financial physics. And for a while, it worked spectacularly. Fortunes were made. Deals that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier were suddenly happening every week. The men at the centre of it grew rich beyond imagining, and were celebrated as visionaries, as revolutionaries as the smartest people in a very smart room. The champagne flowed, the fees poured in, and everyone congratulated themselves on being clever enough to see what the stuffy old guard had missed. But there was a shadow under all of it, and some quiet voices tried to point it out and were ignored. All this borrowing rested on the assumption that the good times would continue, that the risky companies would keep paying, that the music would never stop. Debt is a wonderful servant and a terrible master, and the entire glittering structure was built on a mountain of it. Nobody wanted to think about what would happen if that mountain ever started to slide. That was a problem for later, and later was a place these men did not visit. For now, the junk bond machine was roaring, and it was hungry, and it needed things to buy. And what it bought, most dramatically of all, were entire companies, swallowed whole in a maneuver that became the signature move of the decade. Let's talk about the leveraged buyout, the decade's favourite magic trick, which worked a little like buying a house using a loan secured against the house you have not bought yet. Corporate raiders would target a company, borrow staggering amounts of money, purchase it, and then often carve it into pieces and sell them off for parts. To the winners, it was genius, pure financial creativity. To the thousands of employees who lost their jobs when the company they had given their lives to was dismantled for profit, it felt like something else entirely. But you are on the floor, watching the deal come together, and all you can see are the fees. Oh, the beautiful fees. Here is how the trick works, and it really is dazzling once you see the shape of it. A raider identifies a company he believes is worth more than its current price, often a sleepy, undervalued firm sitting on valuable assets. He does not use his own money to buy it, because that would be enormous and risky. Instead, he borrows the vast majority of the purchase price, and here is the clever, almost impudent part. He borrows it against the company he's about to buy. The target company's own assets and future earnings become the collateral for the loan used to purchase it. The company, in effect, funds its own conquest. Once the raider owns it, the company now carries a mountain of debt it did not have before, debt taken on purely to buy itself. And that debt has to be serviced, which means money has to be found, fast. So the new owner goes looking for cash inside his prize. He sells off divisions, he closes factories, he cuts costs to the bone. Sometimes he breaks the whole thing into pieces and sells them separately, discovering that the parts are worth more than the whole, pocketing the difference as pure profit. A company that had existed for generations could be bought, gutted, and dismantled in a matter of months. To the men doing it, and to you watching from the floor, this looked like brilliance, like unlocking hidden value, like a bold and clever improvement on a lazy old system. Underperforming companies were being shaken awake, waste was being cut, assets were being put to better use. That was the story, and it was told with total conviction, and parts of it were even true. Some of these companies genuinely had been poorly run. Some of the shake-ups genuinely did create value, but there was another side to it. One that was easy to ignore from behind a trading desk and impossible to ignore if you happened to work at one of the targeted firms. Behind the elegant financial maneuvering were real people, thousands of them, whose jobs vanished when a division was sold or a factory was closed to service a debt taken on entirely without their say. Communities that depended on a long-standing employer could be hollowed out in a single quarter. To the raider, it was a spreadsheet being optimized. To the family whose livelihood disappeared, it was a catastrophe arriving in the mail. And you, on the floor, watching a big buyout come together, feel almost nothing about any of that, because your attention is entirely captured by one thing, the fees. A deal this size generates staggering fees, advisory fees and financing fees, and fees you did not even know had names, all of it flowing to the banks and the bankers who make it happen. You're not thinking about the factory workers. You're thinking about the number, the bonus, the scoreboard, and this deal is going to look magnificent on all of them. The trouble is that not every clever way to make money on the floor was strictly legal, and the line between a brilliant edge and a federal crime turned out to be far blurrier than anyone wanted to admit. Now we should tiptoe into dangerous territory, the grey zone where a good tip and a federal crime look confusingly similar. In a world built on information, the temptation to trade on secrets you were not supposed to have was enormous, and plenty of people did not resist it. A whisper at the right dinner, a leaked document, a friend with knowledge of a deal before it went public. It felt harmless, it felt smart, it felt like just how the game was played. It was also, in the plainest possible terms, illegal, and by the middle of the decade the people whose job it was to notice these things had started very much to notice. But surely they would never come for you. The logic of the temptation is easy to follow, which is exactly what makes it dangerous. Your entire profession is the pursuit of an edge, of knowing something slightly sooner or slightly better than the next person. That is what you do all day, legally, honourably, chasing scraps of insight through phone calls and research and instinct. So when a genuinely valuable secret drifts into your hands, information that has not yet reached the public, information that would let you make a fortune with no risk at all, it does not feel like a bright red line. It feels like the same game, just easier. It feels like winning. And the secrets were everywhere, because a big deal cannot be done in complete silence. Lawyers know, bankers know, printers who typeset the documents know. Somewhere along the chain, before a merger or a buyout is announced to the world, dozens of people already know it is coming, and every single one of them is sitting on knowledge that is worth an enormous amount of money to anyone willing to act on it early. A quiet word at a dinner party. A favour traded between friends. A document that lingers a moment too long on the wrong desk. The information leaks, and the temptation follows it everywhere it goes. Trading on that knowledge felt to the people doing it almost victimless. A clever use of good connections rather than a crime. They told themselves everyone did it, that it was just how the smart money operated, that the rules were for the slow and the timid. They convinced themselves the risk was minimal, that they were far too careful and far too clever to ever be caught. The confidence of the age, that same intoxicating certainty that ran through everything, whispered that consequences were for other people. But it was illegal, plainly and simply, and the people whose job it was to police these things were neither as slow nor as stupid as the traders assumed. Quietly, patiently, they had begun to build cases, following the money, mapping the connections, noticing the suspiciously well-timed trades that clustered like flies around every big announcement. The investigators worked in offices far less glamorous than yours, on salaries you would find insulting, and they had one thing the traders had lost entirely, which was patience. They were in no hurry. They only had to be right once. And so, the middle of the decade became a strange, tense time beneath the surface glitter. The party roared on, the deals kept flowing, the confidence remained absolute. But underneath it, a reckoning was slowly assembling itself, thread by thread, and the men trading on their whispered secrets had no idea how many of those threads led directly back to them. They felt untouchable. They were about to learn otherwise, but that storm is still gathering, and for now the floor roars on, powered as always by the youngest and most disposable people in the whole operation. So spare a thought for the exhausted creatures at the very bottom of the ladder. Spare a thought now for the junior analyst, the freshly graduated young person at the very bottom of this glittering food chain. If you are one of them, your life is not a life, it is an endurance experiment. You work 20-hour days, you sleep under your desk, you fetch coffee, build spreadsheets by hand, and absorb abuse from every direction, as though it were part of the compensation package, which, in a sense, it is. You're paid well by the standards of a 22-year-old and treated worse than the office plants. You tell yourself it is temporary, a rite of passage, and that one day you will be the one throwing the stapler. That thought is the only thing keeping you upright. The hours alone would break most people, and they are meant to. You arrive before the sun, and you leave long after it has gone, and on the worst nights you do not leave at all, folding yourself under your desk for a few hours of grey, uncomfortable sleep before the whole thing begins again. Time stops meaning much. Days blur into a single endless shift punctuated by moments of panic. You forget what a weekend feels like. Your friends outside this world stop inviting you to things because you never come, and eventually you stop noticing they have stopped. The work itself swings wildly between crushing tedium and pure terror. Much of it is grinding, repetitive drudgery, assembling numbers by hand, checking figures, building the enormous documents that the important people will present and take credit for. Remember, this is an age before a computer will do this for you at the press of a button. It is done by hand, by you, late at night, and a single error buried on page 40 of a document can bring a senior person's fury down on your head like a collapsing building. So you check and recheck and check again, hollow-eyed, terrified of the mistake that has your name on it. And then there is the abuse, which is simply understood to be part of the arrangement. You are shouted at, you're belittled, you're handed impossible tasks with impossible deadlines and blamed when the impossibility asserts itself. Your ideas are ignored, your presence is barely acknowledged, and you're expected to absorb all of it with a grateful smile because there are 100 hungry graduates who would take your desk in a heartbeat. The mistreatment is not a flaw in the system. It is the system, a deliberate filter designed to see who will break and who will simply take it and keep going. The strangest part, the part that would baffle any sensible observer, is that you want this. You fought for this. You beat out dozens of other bright young people for the privilege of being treated like this, and you would fight to keep it. Because you can see just above you the rungs of the ladder, and you can see where they lead, to the corner office, and the enormous bonus and the power you crave. The suffering is an investment, or so you tell yourself at 3 a.m. under your desk. Pay now, collect later, so you endure. You fetch the coffee, you build the spreadsheets, you swallow the insults, and you cling to the promise, mostly true, occasionally not, that this is temporary, that the worm eventually turns, that one day you will stand at the top of this pyramid and inflict the exact same treatment on some fresh-eyed graduate of your own. It is not a noble dream, but at the bottom of the ladder, it is the only warmth available. Of course, this brutal ladder was not open to everyone equally. In fact, the whole gleaming structure was built as a very exclusive club, with a door that stayed firmly shut to most of the human race. Let's talk about who was actually allowed inside this world, because the answer, overwhelmingly, was men who looked and sounded like the men already there. For the women who fought their way onto the floor, the daily reality was a gauntlet of condescension, exclusion, and behaviour that would end careers today and barely raised an eyebrow then. The whole environment was designed, consciously or not, as a clubhouse, complete with a culture that treated exclusion as tradition, and tradition as a good enough excuse. The talent locked out of that room was staggering, but the men inside were far too pleased with themselves to notice what they were missing. Look around the floor, and the sameness is almost comical once you notice it. Row upon row of men, dressed alike, speaking alike, sharing the same backgrounds and the same schools, and the same unshakable belief in their own belonging. The uniformity was not questioned, because to the men inside it did not look like uniformity at all. It just looked like what a serious person was supposed to be. Anyone who looked or sounded different was, by that unspoken logic, automatically a little suspicious, a little out of place, a problem to be explained rather than a colleague to be welcomed. For the women who did force their way in, and some did, through sheer brilliance and a tolerance for nonsense that would shame a saint, the daily experience was a continuous low-grade siege. Their ideas were interpreted more slowly and credited less. Their presence in a meeting was treated as needing justification. They were spoken over, talked down to, and subjected to a running commentary on their appearance and their manner that no man ever had to endure. Behaviour that today would empty an office of its senior staff by lunchtime was simply the weather they were expected to work through, without complaint, while also somehow outperforming everyone just to be considered adequate. The exclusion extended past the official work into all the places where the real business actually happened, which made it especially effective. So many of the important relationships were built in spaces built for the men, at the late-night dinners, in the clubby after-hours haunts, in 100 small social rituals from which outsiders were quietly and completely absent. You could be brilliant and hard-working, and still find yourself locked out of the rooms where careers were actually made, not by any written rule, but by a soft, total, deniable understanding of who belonged and who did not. And the men inside justified all of it, when they bothered to justify at all, with the laziest argument ever devised, which is that this was simply how things had always been. Tradition, the way of the place. It had worked so far, had it not, and look how rich everyone was. That the tradition might be excluding enormous amounts of talent, that the club might be weaker for its own narrowness, never seriously occurred to them, because the club was designed precisely to prevent that thought from ever needing to be had. The waste of it is the part that lingers. All that ability turned away at the door, all those sharp minds sent elsewhere or ground down or simply never given a chance, in the name of keeping a comfortable room comfortable for the men already in it. The club congratulated itself endlessly on being the best of the best, while quietly ensuring it would only ever be the best of a very small and very familiar few, and it never once suspected it was cheating itself. The men inside, of course, felt no lack. They felt like winners, and winners in their world proved it by surrounding themselves with expensive and beautiful things. Which brings us to the glittering toys, the watches and the cars and the sacred objects of status that a master of the universe simply could not do without. Now let's talk about the toys, because money that cannot be seen is, to this crowd, money that barely exists. Every purchase is a message. The watch must be a specific, knowing brand that other insiders will recognize and civilians will not. The car must be a European sports machine, ideally red, ideally impractical, ideally driven at reckless speed to a summer house you visit twice. Everything you own is chosen not for how it makes you feel, but for how it makes other bankers feel, which is to say, slightly worse about themselves. It is exhausting, it is expensive, and it is the entire point. Start with the watch, because the watch is the purest example of the whole strange philosophy. You do not buy a watch to tell the time. You have 100 ways to tell the time. You buy a watch to send a signal, and the best signals are the quiet ones, the ones only the initiated can read. A truly knowing timepiece does not shout its price at strangers. It murmurs it to the tiny handful of people who understand exactly what it is and exactly what it cost. A secret handshake worn on the wrist. The satisfaction is not in the object. It is in the flicker of recognition on a rival's face. Then the car, which is a louder instrument entirely. A European sports machine, gleaming and low and utterly unsuited to the actual conditions of a crowded city, is not transportation. It is a statement fired at full volume. It does not matter that you sit in the same traffic as everyone else, that the thing is impractical and temperamental and spends most of its life parked. What matters is the arrival, the moment you pull up and step out and let the machine do your talking. You drive it recklessly out to the summer house you barely visit, because the point of the summer house, like the point of the car, is not to use it, but to have it, and to be known to have it. And this is the thread running through all of it, the logic that makes the whole spending spree make a kind of demented sense. Nothing you buy is really for you. The pleasure is not in the driving or the wearing or the living. The pleasure is entirely in the effect the object has on other people, and specifically on other men exactly like you. You're not assembling a life. You're assembling evidence, exhibit after gleaming exhibit, in an endless trial, where the only verdict that matters is whether the other bankers are impressed. Which means, of course, that you can never win, because the game has no finish line. There is always a better watch, a faster car, a bigger house, a more exclusive version of whatever you just bought to feel superior. The moment you acquire the thing you wanted, it stops being impressive and becomes merely normal, and your eye drifts immediately to the next rung. The satisfaction evaporates on contact. You're running on a treadmill made of objects, faster and faster, and the finish line moves exactly as fast as you do. It is exhausting if you ever stop long enough to feel it, which you rarely do. All that money, all that striving converted into a pile of beautiful things that bring you no lasting joy, chosen entirely to needle people you do not even like. But you do not stop to feel it. You check your watch, the knowing one, and you feel the small warm hit of superiority, and it is enough to keep you buying. And of all the trophies a man can accumulate, none is more public, more scrutinized, or more brutally competitive than the place he chooses to hang his hat, which is a battle all its own. It's time to talk about real estate, because where you live is not a home, it is a public scorecard with a doorman. The goal is an apartment in exactly the right building, in exactly the right neighborhood, with a view that says you have arrived. Getting past the notoriously snobbish co-op boards is its own blood sport, a humiliating audition in which extremely wealthy people are judged by even wealthier people, and frequently found wanting. Once inside, you will hire a decorator to fill the place with expensive things, then spend almost no time there because you are always at the office, but it will look magnificent in the 6 minutes a week you are home to see it. The address itself carries meaning as precise as a rank on a uniform. Certain buildings on certain streets, in certain neighborhoods, announce that you've arrived at a specific altitude of success, and everyone in your world can read the coordinates instantly. To live at the wrong address, even a comfortable one, is to be quietly filed as someone still climbing. To live at the right one is to be waved through socially, without another question asked. So you do not simply look for somewhere pleasant to live. You hunt for a set of coordinates, a trophy with an entrance, and a doorman who will learn to greet your guests by name. But the right buildings do not simply let you in because you have the money, and this is the part that drives men like you to quiet fury. Many of the most desirable buildings are governed by boards of existing residents, and these boards decide who may buy in and who may not. To be allowed to hand over your enormous fortune, you must first submit to an audition, presenting your finances, your references, and yourself for the judgment of a panel of people who already live there and who enjoy nothing more than deciding you're not quite their sort. It is a genuinely humiliating ritual, and it is one of the very few in your life where your money does not automatically win. You, a self-declared master of the universe, a man accustomed to being feared and flattered, must sit in a room and be evaluated like a nervous job applicant, by a committee of retirees and heiresses who could reject you on a whim and never explain why. The powerlessness is maddening. The fact that they are often even richer and even more established than you, and therefore genuinely unimpressed by everything you have built your identity around, is the sharpest cut of all. If you clear that hurdle, the real spending begins, because an empty trophy is no trophy at all. You hire a decorator, because choosing your own furnishings would be both time-consuming and dangerously revealing of your actual taste, and you hand them a budget that would make most people faint. They fill the place with expensive art, expensive furniture, expensive everything, assembling a stage set of success calibrated precisely to impress the specific people you intend to invite over. Your home becomes a showroom, beautiful and expensive and not really yours, curated for an audience. And then, the final absurdity, you almost never actually live in it. You're at the office before dawn and back long after dark, and the magnificent apartment sits empty and gleaming, admired mostly by the cleaning staff. You experience your own home in brief, exhausted glimpses, a few minutes here and there, a place to change your suit and collapse. You spent a fortune and endured a humiliation to acquire a trophy you barely have time to look at. But it photographs beautifully, and on the rare evening you host, it does its job flawlessly. And that, you tell yourself, is what it was always for. Furnishing the trophy is only one branch of a much larger compulsion, though. A restless need to acquire that follows you well beyond the front door and into every shop that will have you. Let's go shopping, because for a certain kind of 1980s banker, spending money was less a pleasure and more a compulsion, like breathing but with a receipt. You buy suits you do not need, shirts by the dozen, shoes that gleam. The store clerks know you by name and greet you like visiting royalty, which you find entirely appropriate. The purchases pile up in your closet, tags sometimes still attached because the actual acquiring was never really the goal. The goal was the feeling, that brief warm hit of importance that comes from handing over a card and watching someone else scramble. And the feeling never lasts, so you go back and do it again. The scale of it makes no rational sense, and rational sense is not the point. You already own more suits than there are days in your working week, and yet you buy more, because the buying is not about need. You own shirts by the dozen, still crisp in their packaging, some of which you will never wear before they go out of fashion, or you simply forget they exist. Your shoes gleam in rows like a small parade. By any sane measure, you have vastly more than you could ever use, and the acquiring continues anyway, steady and compulsive, a habit that has quietly detached itself from any purpose. Part of the pleasure is the treatment, and the treatment is genuinely intoxicating. In the right shops, you are not a customer, you are royalty. The clerks know your name, know your sizes, know your preferences, and greet you with a warmth and deference that soothes something raw in you. They bring you things. They fuss over you. They make you feel, for the length of the visit, like the most important person in the world, and you accept this as entirely your due. In a life spent mostly being shouted at and comparing yourself anxiously to rivals, the shop is a rare place where you're simply adored, and you go back to be adored again. But underneath the ritual is the real engine, which is the transaction itself, the specific moment of paying. When you hand over the card and watch the staff spring into motion on your behalf, wrapping and boxing and thanking, you feel a brief, warm surge of power and importance, a little hit of pure significance. For a few seconds you are unmistakably a man of consequence, and the feeling is lovely, and it is also chemical and fleeting, gone almost as soon as it arrives. The goods are almost beside the point. It was the moment you were buying, and because the feeling fades so quickly, you need it again, and so the cycle turns. You buy, you glow briefly, you fade, you buy again. The purchases accumulate in your closet, some with the tag still attached, monuments to a hunger that no amount of merchandise can actually fill. If you ever stop to look at that closet honestly, at the sheer unworn abundance of it, you might feel a chill of recognition, might see the compulsion for what it is. But you do not stop to look. You're already thinking about the next thing. It is the same restless emptiness that drives everything else in your life. The bonus, the trophies, the endless comparison, simply pointed at a rack of shirts. More never becomes enough, because enough was never the target. The chase was the target, and the chase, by design, has no end. The one place you might expect this crowd to seek something real, rather than another purchase, is in the care of their own bodies. But even that, it turns out, became just another performance. We should talk about the physical maintenance of the 1980s financier, which was its own strange contradiction. On one hand, there was a growing obsession with fitness, with sharp jaws and squash games and being seen at the right gym. On the other hand, this was a person surviving on coffee, adrenaline, expensive dinners, and substances that were actively trying to kill them. The result was a body pushed to its absolute limits and then asked to look fantastic in a suit. Stress was a constant companion, ignored until it announced itself, sometimes dramatically. But worrying about your health felt like something that happened to other, weaker people. You had a meeting. The fitness obsession was real, and like everything else in your life, it was as much about display as about health. Being lean and sharp-jawed and visibly disciplined signalled that you had your appetites under control, that you were a winner in the body as well as the bank account, so you played squash, aggressively, competitively, treating a friendly game as another arena to dominate. You appeared at the right health club, where being seen mattering nearly as much as anything you did there. A fit body was a kind of resume, worn under the expensive suit, proof of the same relentless drive that made you money. But the contradiction beneath it was almost comical, and it was not funny at all. This carefully maintained body was simultaneously being poisoned by nearly everything else in your life. You ran on coffee and adrenaline and very little sleep. You ate enormous rich dinners late at night, fueled the days with substances that were quietly attacking your heart, and marinated the whole operation in a constant bath of stress. You were building the machine up in the gym in the morning and tearing it down everywhere else for the rest of the day, and the two efforts roughly cancelled out, leaving you looking sharp on the outside and quietly fraying within. Stress was the constant, uninvited companion, and you had trained yourself to ignore it with a thoroughness that would eventually present a bill. The clenched jaw, the racing heart, the tight chest, the sleepless nights spent staring at the ceiling running numbers, all of it was simply the texture of the job, the price of admission, nothing to make a fuss about. To acknowledge that the stress was hurting you would have been to admit weakness, and weakness was the one thing you could not afford. So you pressed the feeling down and kept moving, telling yourself you would deal with it later, at some vague point when things calmed down. Things never calmed down. And so the warnings, when they came, tended to come suddenly and dramatically, because you had ignored every quiet one along the way. Men in their prime, gleaming with success and squash-court fitness, would find their bodies abruptly presenting the accumulated invoice for years of abuse and denial. The heart, in particular, kept a very accurate ledger, and it did not care how good you looked in a suit or how large your last bonus was. It only cared about the coffee and the powder and the stress and the sleepless nights, and eventually, some of the time, it spoke up in the only language that finally could not be ignored. But that felt like something that happened to other men, weaker men, men who could not handle the pace. You had a meeting. You always had a meeting, and the meeting felt more real and more urgent than any distant worry about a body you were confident would simply keep performing, because it always had. The stress needed release, though, and when the closing bell finally freed you from the floor, release was pursued with exactly the same aggression you brought to everything else. The market closes, but the day is far from over, because for this crowd the evening is simply the second shift of showing off. You spill out into the bars of the financial district, loud and triumphant or loud and furious depending on how the day went, but always loud. Drinks are ordered by the tray, deals are relived, exaggerated and reenacted with hand gestures. The bar is packed with people exactly like you, all decompressing from a day of aggression by being aggressive somewhere else. It is not relaxation, not really. It is the same performance, just with a cocktail in your hand and your tie slightly loosened. The closing bell does not switch you off, it simply redirects you. All that energy, the aggression and the ambition, and the restless need to win, does not evaporate when the market shuts. It pours out of the buildings along with you and floods into the bars where it looks for somewhere new to go. You arrive still vibrating from the day, and whether you're celebrating a triumph or nursing a defeat, the volume is identical, because the point is not the mood. The point is the noise, the presence, the taking up of space. The drinking is done with the same excess as everything else. Nobody sips. Drinks arrive by the tray, bought in grand rounds by men eager to demonstrate that money means nothing to them, that they can incinerate an evening's wages on cocktails without a flicker. The generosity is real and also entirely competitive. Each round a small flex, each bought drink a way of saying you can afford not to care. The alcohol layers itself over whatever chemistry is already coursing through the crowd, and the whole room tilts steadily toward louder, bolder, and less wise. And the talk, endlessly, is of the day itself, of the deals and the trades and the near misses, relived and reshaped with every retelling. A modest win becomes a triumph. A lucky escape becomes a display of genius. Hands slice through the air, reenacting the crucial moment, the bold call, the killer instinct, and everyone is the hero of their own story, and everyone politely lets everyone else be the hero of theirs, because tomorrow they will want the same courtesy in return. The bar is a factory for legends, most of them lightly fictional, all of them flattering. Look around, and the crowd is entirely made of people exactly like you, which is precisely the problem and the appeal. This is not a mix of different lives unwinding together. It is a single type of person, multiplied, all of you fresh from the same battlefield, all of you decompressing from a day of pure aggression by simply being aggressive in a different room. You did not leave the competition at the office. You brought it with you and you set it up at the bar, and you keep score with drinks and stories and volume instead of trades, which is why it is not really relaxation, however much it looks like a party. Genuine rest would require letting the performance drop, and the performance never drops. You loosen your tie, yes, and you laugh, and to a passing stranger it might look like release. But underneath, the same engine is running, the same need to impress, to dominate, to be seen winning. You are working still in a room with a cocktail in your hand, and you will do it until late, and then you will get up in a few short hours and do all of it again. And on certain nights, when the occasion demands real display, the bar is only the warm-up, and the evening moves on to a place where being seen is the entire and only point. Let's talk about dinner, which is not about food and everything about visibility. There are certain restaurants where the powerful eat, and getting a table is a public demonstration of your rank. You know the maitre d' by name, or you desperately pretend to. You're seated, ideally, somewhere prominent, so that everyone entering can note your presence and adjust their opinion of you accordingly. The food is excellent and largely beside the point. What matters is the theatre of it, the nods across the room, the sense that you are dining at the very centre of the universe, which, for one more glittering evening, you genuinely believe you are. There is a small, fiercely guarded set of restaurants where the truly powerful gather, and simply securing a table at one of them is a public statement of your standing. These are not places you can casually walk into. Tables are scarce, coveted, and dispensed according to a hierarchy every bit as strict as the one on your trading floor. To get a good one, on a good night, at short notice, is to prove that you matter, that the machinery of exclusivity recognises you and bends just slightly in your favour. The reservation itself is the first course, and it is the one you savour most. The relationship with the maitre d' is therefore a matter of enormous importance and enormous anxiety. To be known by name, greeted warmly, and led without fuss to a fine table is a public coronation, witnessed by everyone in the room. So you cultivate that relationship carefully, with charm and generous gratuities and the occasional favour, and if you have not quite earned it yet, you fake it, greeting the man with a confident familiarity you hope he will play along with. There are few things more quietly devastating in your world than approaching that podium and receiving a blank, unhurried look. Where you're seated matters just as much as whether you are seated. The prize tables are the visible ones, the ones from which you can see and, crucially, be seen. To be placed prominently is to be put on display for every important person who enters, each of whom will register your presence, note your company, and quietly recalibrate their sense of where you stand. To be tucked away in a corner or near the kitchen is a subtle humiliation, a message that you are not tonight. Among the people who most need to be seen, you would rather wait an hour for a good table than take a bad one immediately. The food, meanwhile, is superb, and you barely register it. The kitchen is genuinely brilliant, the ingredients rare and the preparation flawless, and none of that is really why you are there. You're there for the theatre, the exchange of nods across the room, the little diplomatic signals of recognition and status that pass between the powerful over their untouched plates. A meal here is a performance stage for an audience of peers and rivals, and the actual eating is almost an inconvenience, a thing to be done between the more important business of being observed doing it. And in the warm candlelight, surrounded by the powerful, greeted by name and seated in full view, you feel it settle over you again, that intoxicating conviction that you're at the very centre of the world, that this room is where reality is decided, that you're one of the people who matter most in the most important city on earth. For one more glittering evening, you believe it completely. That belief, repeated night after night, hardens over time into something bigger and stranger than simple confidence, a worldview so grand and so fragile that it deserves a name of its own. Now we arrive at the mindset itself, the towering, almost cosmic self-regard that defined the breed. These men did not think of themselves as merely rich or merely successful. They thought of themselves as a kind of new aristocracy, the smartest and most important people in the world, entitled to their fortunes by sheer superiority. Consequences were for other people. Rules were suggestions for the timid. The ordinary population existed somewhere far below, a blur of little people who didn't understand the game. It was an intoxicating way to see yourself, and a deeply fragile one, because a worldview built entirely on winning has only one direction it can go when the winning stops. The self-regard went far beyond ordinary confidence, which every successful person carries. This was something grander and stranger, a genuine belief that you and your kind were a new breed of aristocracy, elevated above the common run of humanity, not by accident of birth, but by sheer merit, by intelligence and drive and nerve. You had won, therefore you were superior, and your superiority in turn justified your winning. a perfect closed loop of self-flattery that admitted no doubt and required no evidence beyond the size of your own rewards. From inside that loop, the rest of the world looked very small. The ordinary people, the ones who rode the trains and worked the regular jobs and did not understand the game, existed somewhere far below you, a faceless blur of lesser lives. You didn't hate them. You barely thought about them at all except as an audience, a backdrop, occasionally a resource. Their concerns were not your concerns. Their rules were not quite meant for you. When your deals cost some of them their jobs, it didn't register as cruelty, because they were not entirely real to you, not in the way you and your rivals were real. And consequences in this worldview were something that happened to other people, to the weak and the slow and the unlucky. Rules were obstacles for the timid, guidelines that the truly bold understood were negotiable. You'd seen too many rules bent, too many risks rewarded, too many bold moves pay off, to take the idea of limits seriously. The universe, as far as you could tell, was arranged for your benefit and would continue to be, because it always had been, and the past, in the intoxicated logic of a long winning streak, feels exactly like a promise about the future. It is worth pausing to notice how intoxicating this genuinely was, because it explains so much of the behaviour. To feel yourself one of the anointed, one of the smartest and most important people alive, entitled and untouchable and endlessly ascendant, is a feeling so pleasurable that men reorganize their entire personalities around protecting it. Everything, the spending, the aggression, the refusal to rest or reflect, serve to defend that feeling, to keep the story of your own supremacy intact and unquestioned. Doubt was the enemy, and doubt was kept firmly outside the door. But a self-worth built entirely on winning has a fatal design flaw, obvious from any distance and invisible from inside. It has no foundation beneath the winning. It cannot survive a loss because losing is not part of the story, has no place in it, cannot be absorbed. As long as the good times rolled, the masters of the universe felt like gods. But a god who depends on the weather is not a god at all, and the weather, in markets as in everything, always eventually turns. When it did, the men who had built themselves entirely out of victory would discover they had nothing else to stand on. And the first turning came not from the market at all, but from the patient, unglamorous men who'd been quietly building their cases while the party roared, and who were now at last ready to knock on the door. Let's talk about the people you tried very hard not to think about, the regulators and prosecutors slowly assembling their cases in offices far less glamorous than yours. For most of the decade, it was easy to believe they were slow, outmatched, and hopelessly behind. But paper trails have a way of surviving. Wiretaps have a way of recording. And as the middle of the decade turned into its later years, some of the biggest names in the game began, one by one, to fall, marched out in handcuffs in front of the very cameras that had once celebrated them. The party, it turned out, had a guest list, and someone had been checking it all along. For years it was easy to dismiss them, and dismiss them you did. The investigators worked in drab government offices, on salaries that struck you as almost pitiable, without the cars or the suits or the swagger. From the height of your winning streak they looked slow and unglamorous, hopelessly outmatched by the speed and sophistication and sheer wealth of the world they were supposedly policing. You genuinely believed, most of you, that they would never catch up, that they did not understand the game well enough to lay a finger on the people playing it. This was a serious mistake, because the investigators had something the traders had long since lost, which was patience, and patience is a quiet and terrible weapon. They were in no hurry. They didn't need to win every day the way you did. They needed only to be right once, at the end, and they were content to spend years working toward that single moment, following the money, mapping the connections, quietly gathering the evidence that the confident and the careless left scattered everywhere behind them. While you chased the next 30 seconds, they were building something that would take years to complete and would not forget, and the evidence, it turned out, was everywhere, because a world built on communication leaves tracks. Paper trails survive long after the men who made them have forgotten they exist. Records of trade sit patiently in files, waiting, and when the investigators secured the ability to listen, to capture conversations as they happened, the whole game changed, because the confident chatter that felt so private in the moment became, later, a permanent and damning record. The very habits that made the fortunes, the constant talking, the whispered tips, the deals struck over dinner, became the threads that investigators could pull. Then came the pressure, and pressure has a way of turning a tight circle into a chain of falling dominoes. When the investigators finally caught someone with